With that, I want to introduce, well, I already introduced Abby Kozolchik, and Abby is a journalist who has traveled, you name a community, Jewish community in the world, she has been there, and she has worked with National Geographic, Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast Travel, the San Francisco Chronicle. I have a very long list of places and magazines where she collaborated. And she has visited, and she knows firsthand some of the things we saw, so we will hear what she has to say. And I want to introduce Daniel here. You already heard, but he was born in Manaus in the Amazonian, or grew up, right, in Manaus in the Amazonian rainforest. And he comes from this same tradition, from Moroccan families that, following the rubber trade, moved there. And he grew up there, and then I see here that he attended the Amazon Israelite Center for services for Shabbat and festivals and became involved in youth program. Then he began attending the Yeshiva in Sao Paulo, and after graduation he studied in Israel, and then he came to Yeshiva University, to our business school, where he spent a few years. And now he still lives in Washington Heights with his wife Shira, and he works in private banking, and we are glad that he's here also to share some of his experience. You know, you will understand Manaus and Iquitos are not the same city, and you will have to tell us the differences. That's something already we want to know, but these are things that are very much connected, and we want to hear from you guys. So I don't know if you had anything in mind to have an order, or they present, or we have a conversation. Feel free. Abby, why don't you start?
Okay. So I was going to be going to the Amazon for the very first time on an assignment in 2003. And in those days, I used to go to Shabbat services at BJ, where Marcelo Bronstein is one of the rabbis. And it so happened that on the Shabbat before I was going to be going to the Amazon, he mentioned, somebody in Shul mentioned that there was going to be this talk given almost imminently in the next few days by some of the people who had gone to work in this community in Iquitos. And, you know, the talk was called Jews of the Amazon. And I thought, well, how do I not go see this talk, as I am Amazon bound shortly. So I went and was completely fascinated by what I heard. And at the end of the talk, it must have been Guillermo, his brother, who's a rabbi in Lima, who said, if any of you ever finds yourself in Iquitos, you should absolutely look these people up and take things to them. They'll need your help. They'll welcome your company. And I said, well, I actually am going to Iquitos next week, or I'll be on a ship next week that eventually will end up in Iquitos. And what should I do? And he said, take any Judaica you can stick in your bags, whatever will fit that you can comfortably carry. So I took Kiddush cups and candlesticks, and I think some Sidurim, I don't even remember, but basically I went to Westside Judaica and filled filled a bag and took it with me on this trip, and there was so little time to prepare that I never actually managed to make contact with the members of the community before I got there. And I wasn't sure how it was going to work, if I was just going to pull up in a port and show up in these people's homes and it was all going to be cool. And the rabbi, Guillermo, the one in Lima, said, oh yeah, it's okay, don't worry about it. If you don't manage to reach them before you actually get there, just get in one of the little moto taxis. Tell the driver you want to go to such and such address. And when you're there, ask around for a certain Mr. Cacique Cohen, who at that time was the head of the community. Or he was acting head maybe when one of the others was away. So So yeah, I showed up completely unannounced, got off at the port. Well, everybody else on the ship, I mean, the trip I was doing had absolutely nothing to do with Jews in Iquitos. So I think instead of going on the city tour or whatever was going to happen with the rest of the guests on the ship, I jumped in a little moto taxi and went to the place that Rabbi Bronstein had told me to go, and just started knocking on doors to see if anybody knew who Mr. Cacique Cohen might be. And, you know, within a few doors, I was at his home, and I tried to explain myself on the doorstep, but they didn't even let me stand outside for a second. They needed no sort of explanation for who the hell I was. They just said, come in, and I had my bag of Kiddush cups. It was all very strange, but they were so incredibly warm, and so much so that they, of course, insisted I stay around, you know, for a meal. I had to find other people on the ship to let them know not to leave without me, like the forebear of Mr. Edery, I guess. And it was just it was an extraordinary experience, because these people, as you saw in the movie, generally look very much like indigenous Amazonian people you would see anywhere in the region, and except that their last names are Levy and Cacique Cohen, and their home was decorated with all of the tchotchkes you would find in a market, you know, like the tile things that you would buy in Jerusalem that say Shalom, and you know, it was all over their homes, and there was just this palpable sense, and I think we all got a sense of it from the movie too, of a need to connect, or a desire to connect, however possible, whether through wall tchotchkes or visitors, books. Lots and lots and lots of books had piled up in their home, and they were, I think, you know, they were planning to move to Israel too. I think they were Arad bound, and they had been told it would be good and hot there for them. Oops, excuse me. And that was really, I just spent a night with them, and it was one of the most memorable nights of my life, and that trip certainly. It was an amazing trip in other ways as well. But yeah, just to be able to pull up in this strange port in the Amazon and find my way to a vestige of this Jewish community that took me in 1 second was really quite wonderful. So that's my experience in Iquitos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so perhaps we should hear
I will I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. I see that there's some pizza left, so that might have been the main reason you guys came, so that's exciting. I'd like to acknowledge just real quick Professor Siba Mitz that is here tonight. She is really a big part of me coming to YU and staying part of this community. My wife Shiro is here tonight too. Thank you. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, which is a little bit far from Manaus, but at age 3 I went to Manaus, and my family had originally also come from Morocco, originally from Tangier. Between the 1800s, mid-1800s, that was really the mother of my great-grandma. So it's they came from Morocco, from Tangier. She actually came to already meet my great-grandfather that was already here to be with her, because the men came first to the region to start a new life, and eventually the wives came to meet with them. Some of them I've heard from other stories where they didn't even know their husband. They just came because they happened to be Jewish and they were doing well in this region, and they needed to get married with Jewish woman, and they just went on a boat from Morocco and dropped in Amazon and met their husband. Unfortunately, that did not happen to some of those, and the community then slowly my family specifically started with trades and doing commercial activities in the area. As they grew, they were able to go to Manaus, which was a bigger city at the time, than anywhere else around the Amazon. For a minute, we saw a little arrow going through Manaus until they reached Iquitos. That's exactly where my family stayed. And as they grew, they were able to go to Manaus and then create a new community there. It was very common to get married with the cousins because there were really no women there to get married with. At first they had two big shuls there where they attended, and now we have only one. That's why my mid-1940s or so, that's around when my father was born, and they had only one shul. My experience with the community was at first with just Shabbat and festivals, which was they taught me all the traditions from Moroccan traditions, where it's not common on other places, where I found out later on. At first I thought I was weird or different, or where these traditions came from, where we're surrounded by Ashkenazim and Sephardim, where they're from Europe or some Iran or Syria, and the Moroccan traditions are not really as well known.
Give an example.
For example, mainly the rituals, this singing, the tunes for Kabbalat Shabbat, many of what we saw here is exactly how it sounds in Manaus, which is not how it sounds in Ashkenazi shul and how it sounds in a Sephardic shul. I then started getting interested on why things are the way they are, and in Judaism in general, and I went to do my bar mitzvah in Rio, back in Rio where my family was living then, to do my bar mitzvah, where it was closer for everybody to come. And I had a cousin, and the son of the rabbi also was going to Yeshiva in São Paulo, which is one of the biggest Jewish communities in Brazil. And I was able to then finish my year there. I was my bar mitzvah in July. I finished my year in December, and started the year. In Brazil, it starts the year in January as opposed to here in July. So I started the year there in January, and it was just fascinating for me to learn a lot more about Judaism, because as far as it sounds, back then, internet, it just wasn't like as, knowledge wasn't like that, where you could just access right away, literally. Especially where Manaus, it's literally 4 hours away by plane from the biggest Jewish communities in Brazil. So there was really, other than what they had passed to the shaliach there and to what they were able to come up with at that point, there was not really much we had. And when I went to São Paulo, I was able to learn a lot more. And I became involved with a group called Bnei Akiva, which is kind of an NCSY of the United States, I believe. And one of the main things of Bnei Akiva is that they want to get you into, get all the Jews back into religion about the idea of Kiruv. And as I became more involved with the group, I realized that I had a lot to do in my own community. And I figured the more I learned the Judaism part of it, but together with Bnei Akiva, I was able to learn more how to bring people together and get events and do things where they could relate to Judaism more and maybe help the community more. And that's what I did on the summers when I went back home to see my family. My parents, we started with little, first starting with helping the shaliach at the synagogue with the laning. They had little lecture, little shir in between Sudah Shlishit and Arvit, and during Shabbat, so they started slowly giving me the opportunity to talk to them as well. From there, we made the camp there. We were able to talk to them a lot more about Judaism and implement a few things to a point where we are doing like the Eruv around the camp, where it was something that was unheard of. We would easily carry all over the place without knowing that you had to do an Eruv, which is really, for them, was extremely like mind-blowing, shocking. Where we were able to do a few lectures in about Judaism, where we were able to actually get over 60 people to come to shul, young people mainly, where we talked about Judaism and try to get them to understand a little bit more, mainly pass them the information that I was getting from other places and slowly try to get them to do so. We started doing on Sundays we had, try to get people to come and put fill-in. We do the little breakfast afterwards, get people to start realizing this, getting more used to it. Because mainly shul only happens on Shabbat and the festivals. There is no anything during the week, so they're not really familiar with tefillin. They say the concept of tefillin, you just put it 2 times, one in your bar mitzvah and another one in the closet, because you really don't use it ever. From there, I was able to go to Israel for a year, and then eventually came to Yeshiva University. A few interesting things that I realized throughout the movie is, and it's really true, there are some people that do live outside, although Manaus was still small, but there are still communities outside it, and not organized community, but people that we hear that it has the exact same. There is a very famous singer in Manaus called David Assayag, which is from Parintins. He's from Parintins, which is a very small city, a few hours away from Manaus. And his name is 100% Jews. He has
super Moroccan.
Super Moroccan.
Yeah.
You hear things like that, and you say, hey, it's a really a proof of the Jews really passing through those areas. You hear some of customs. My father was telling me right before I told him about the lecture. He was telling me he had met someone that his whole life, his mother had lit candles on Friday night, and for him was just, I don't know, it would make the home, the house more homey, or would bring the weekend more peacefully or something. Had no idea where. And my father told him, "Did you hear about, maybe it's related to Judaism because we don't have the Shabbos candles?" And the person was like, "No, we never heard anything like that." But it was something that his mother used to do, and they had no idea why they were doing it. But it's literally a proof of, really the Jews passing through those communities. Another example, really quick, that I found interesting too. We have in Manaus, we have now we do have a Jewish cemetery. We didn't have it then, and one rabbi came from Israel and was passing by to either learn more about the community, maybe collect a little bit more for his yeshiva in Israel, and he happened to get a very strong disease that was at the time, and he died in Manaus. There was no Jewish cemetery, so they buried him on the regular, the non-Jewish cemetery. And once we had, and we knew about it, but once we had our own cemetery, we figured, let's try to get him, this rabbi back to our cemetery where he could have his place. And it was a whole big thing because even the non-Jews were praying for him and making sure they get the answers, the answer for their prayer out of this rabbi. And they had tons of, we went there and there's tons of letters and things and signs, and
so they have become like a saint.
He had become a saint for them, and there was no way you could get him out of there. The only way, the only way they were able to do for him was to really cover it with a little fence around it, so that would somehow protect the history of the place. But it's filled with letters and thank you so much for your help and things like that. Totally. It's
so let me see, before we open the floor for questions, I'm sure there might be many. I wanted just to acknowledge the presence of a few professors that I didn't have a chance to do so before. Professor Marcelo Breutmann from the Spanish department, Professor Ruth Bevan from the Political Science department, and a big friend of the honors program. We have done many things together, and with her interest in international, I'm sure that this is right up your alley. And Professor Elias Grigoyadis.
Synagogue in Manaus.
Oh, yeah? and Professor Elias Grigoyanis from the economics department, who also is with us in all activities. We were on Sunday together at the theater. Now we meet again. So I am not leaving anyone out, right? No. Okay, well, good. So let's have questions for the speakers and in general comments. Okay.
So sort of, I was wondering, how did you exactly get in? Because you were saying you were spreading about, Jewish and becoming more involved with Judaism to the people in your community. But was it your parents who sort of put you in that direction? Was that your personal decision? Because it just sort of seemed like, wow, there's this guy in this community, and now he's going to learn in Brazil and decides to go to Israel. So where was that all coming from?
It was my parents were very traditional. We had our kiddush in Shabbat, but TV was the next event at the night. There was really not much of it, but we really had an idea of tradition and the prayers, and we would go to synagogues and things. But it was really, I just wanted to know more of what we did, because it was so different, and it was so different and important for my family and for the Jewish community that I belonged, that I just wanted to understand more about it and really learn why and what's behind this, and given how limited the information was in Manaus where I lived, I had just to go somewhere else and look for it, and I guess I found it, which is good.
I have a question for Abby. Abby, I'm sure you traveled a lot, and this is not the first time that you saw a small Jewish community, and anyone who travels and has a curiosity about Jewish things has seen small communities around the world. But what is different here? Because I have seen small communities like arriving to Siena, for example, or to Livorno, to give examples of very small communities struggling to survive. But you have a sense of something, in the process of dying or disappearing, and elderly people dominating the life. Here I get a completely different impression, that this is a vibrant, small, struggling, maybe with many things that we would want to be different, but vibrant. Do you have some things like this that you have seen, or what is your impression comparing to other places?
I had not, nor have I since seen anything like the community in Iquitos. It's so, there were relatively few left by the time I was there. A number had really left, I think a few years earlier, but still there were clearly young people involved, and sort of more becoming interested. It didn't have a defunct air to it, and maybe because the interest had been pretty recently re-sparked by everything that we saw here. So it didn't, it was sort of, it felt the opposite of the Stigel. It felt like it was just growing, even if part of it was growing in Israel, or most of it was growing in Israel. And then there's just an air of the improbable to the whole thing. I mean, Iquitos is so cut off from nearly everything but the jungle, that the idea of Judaism flourishing there is just wildly improbable. So I guess those things made the experience pretty different, I would say. Yeah.
I have a question for Daniel. Often I encounter people who tell me things like either that they met people or that they themselves, they're from the wider Hispanic world, whether they're from Spain or they're from South America, who tell me, oh, yeah, we're Jewish. At their deathbed, my mother told me that we're Jewish. And in Brazil, there is a group, some of them link themselves back to conversos who came in the colonial era. And I wonder, in the region where you're from, and you have family, is there a lot of overlap? Are there people who have these kind of Jewish things in their closet, so to speak? And where's it coming from? Is there overlap between the kind of the people from converso origins and the Moroccans? And is there kind of I don't know.
I guess the difference between what happened in Peru, I believe, yeah, that then what happens in Manaus in my community is that unlike there'll be, in our case, I believe Manaus will be Lima and Iquitos is just away from that main community. We don't have that, we just have Manaus. So I think there is it's very hard to allow, in a way, say, okay, if you have your ancestors, you tell them your ancestors are Jewish, come be part of my community. And, you know, if you show you're serious and all that, we'll help you. It's different to have you inside the main community and having it outside of it. Once it's outside of it, I guess they can come and can do a thing with them. Once it comes into your own community, it's as harsh as it might sound. They start interacting with the community more. They know more people. Eventually, I mean, one of the persons there, the president of the community of Lima, I believe, said they start knowing people and they eventually get married to them, and they might, and you don't know whether they are really gonna get this conversion that they want to do. Mm-hmm. And
do you have people who kind of show up in a place like Manal
Yeah,
and say,
yeah.
oh yeah, I think I'm Jewish. My grandfather told me he was Jewish.
Yeah.
So what happens? Do they?
It's very hard to start allowing all of them, because he's gonna bring someone else that is gonna bring someone else, and at some point, you have an entire half of your shul might have been part of their ancestors were Jewish, mm-hmm. and the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. The problem of assimilation has been a big problem in Manaus. Part of the reason is that although there are people with ancestors, and then bring someone else that does not have the same history, and once you start opening the door that much for this, it just start conflicting with the community that is already scarce, that is already trying to survive. There are some of them have already made Aliyah, which is good, but some of them intermarried with Jews that and never got converted properly as they were supposed to, and it's just something that is.
People who stayed in Manaus.
Yeah, and it's just, fortunately, and this happens to be my own opinion. I think it's just sad that they just get accommodated where they should really get the conversion that mm-hmm. They went there in the first place looking for. Mm. Wow. Make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a very thin. It's a very thin line between allowing people that are not really Jewish to in the community, in order to make sure that and making sure that they really follow the mm-hmm. process. I mean, Iquitos was really a different area where it was dealt with. Once it starts getting in the same place as the Jewish community is trying to survive, it gets a bit hard.
Because you say, because in Iquito, these people were the majority. They were the
community.
community.
They were the community.
Manaus, where there was a Jewish community.
They were the community, and they brought someone there to do their thing. They really didn't have much of contact with Lima, I believe, which was, I guess, was as strong as one of the rabbis there was saying from Lima, that it's really a very complicated
situation. But also there's a big socioeconomic and ethnic and racial piece here, right? Yeah. Where Jews in Lima, are a certain class, mm-hmm. generally high class, and they're white, and these people are very poor, and right, and so I imagine it's different. Every community is going to work differently, but I think that those questions become very charged.
Yeah, I guess you're 100% right. It just gets complicated as it gets closer to the community.
Some questions?
The movie stressed a big part about the people from Iquitos making Aliyah, moving to Israel. Did a similar phenomenon happen in Manaus? Was there a mass?
No, unfortunately not. We never had this many people in the community, like with the same ideal like that in order to convert and do this whole process. No, not that many. We did have both Jews and people that are not yet converted going to Israel. Yes, it's we were able to do that, but not literally, no, not nearly as, you know, as big as it was
The
in
economic
Iquitos.
situation good in Manaus? Is it a growing?
Yes,
right.
yes, growing. Brazil in general, it's been growing a lot. In Manaus, it's really been able to take advantage of that.
And Iquitos is a bit, you know, down and
Yeah,
out.
Iquitos is
It's,
not,
it's,
That's been-
yeah. I mean, it's a great place, but you wouldn't want to have to make your living there. It's, yeah.
How many secret Torah did you have in your,
I'm sorry, Denise.
how many secret Torah?
Last time I was there, which might have been about 4 years ago, I will have about five.
Like kosher ones or?
Three kosher ones, I'd say. Really, because I remember there was a very old one that they really keep it there. Probably not 100% kosher, but a good amount, I'd say. The Jewish community is very vibrant. They do a lot in terms of traditional things like that, like Sefer Torah, synagogue on Shabbat, things like that. They're very strong about. It's very hard. It becomes very hard when it comes to kosher, when it comes to the little. Well, little I don't call little, but still like detail within the big things they're good at. It's just the little help with the little, which is also part of the knowledge that they didn't have growing up.